And this afternoon, the international ratings agency Fitch is asking government to opt for an austerity support from the International Monetary Fund IMF. This policy measure, experts say, will guard against the imminent collapse of the Ghanaian economy, which is experiencing its slowest growth since the 1980s. Fitch, which downgraded Ghana's economic outlook in January 2022, says an IMF bailout will be required to avert the crisis.
On the positive side, that is what things could lead to a stabilization of the rating. A resumption of access to international capital markets would be a big one. That could come from an IMF program or from a change in investor sentiment. Over the medium term, we will be paying attention to the international reserves position and whether Ghana can see a rise in non-debt creating flows like FDI. And we'll also be paying attention to whether the government can implement its fiscal consolidation plan and put public sector debt on a downward path.
And that's the position of Fitch on this matter. Fitch is not the only organization calling for this. The World Bank is also adding its voice to the prescription, with its country director, Pierre Laporte, saying it will be helpful for Ghana to have IMF on board to deal with this imminent crisis.
There's been a lot of talk about IMF or not IMF. Recently I was asked in an interview. My basic principle is, at a starting point, no country should need IMF, really strictly speaking. Okay? Many countries in the world don't have IMF program, but they are performing very well. But the reality is different countries need IMF. That's why they were established in the first place, because, by law of nature, some countries at one time or the other will face challenges, and that's why we have institutions like IMF, the World Bank, who are here to come in those difficult times. Today, there's a lot of debate I follow in Ghana. Some people think you should, some people think you should not. I think it's not right for me to comment on it, whether you should or should not. But like I said recently, there are advantages of working with IMF in these circumstances. For instance, if Ghana really wants to go in an aggressive or very serious debt rescheduling initiative now, it will help to have IMF on board, because most creditors would ask you, what is the program underpinning this debt relief that will ensure that macroeconomic stability is restored? At the same time, if government really takes strong enough measures to restore macro stability, then maybe it doesn't need IMF. I have to be careful, because my IMF colleagues might think I'm undermining what they want to do. Like I said, it's one way or the other. But to sum up, just to say again that the situation is serious, and we at the World Bank, what are we doing? We are really supporting Ministry of Finance, government, through advice on tax policies. There are options that we see also, but at the same time, we are here to advise. We do not want you to force hands, but we have also instruments like budget support that we can give to help build the treasury situation. But all of these, provided there are strong enough reforms that will accompany this. And finally, just to say, you've talked a lot today about fiscal issues, tax issues. It's true that tax GDP ratio at 12-13% for a country like Ghana is not good enough. The norm for the region is around 20, and that's where the most of the world will look at. But there are other challenges, like in the energy sector, that is causing so much problems for the budget. Today, as we speak, the annual deficit just for the energy sector going out of the budget is over $1 billion. It's a lot. And if nothing is done, there's a very good, very strong energy reform program. We are encouraged that, governments are really moving to implement it, but it should be accelerated, because only this can save government at now $1 billion a year, or it can even avoid, if things are not done in the next 2 or 3 years, it can go much higher than that.
So where is all of this starting from? The concern is about the financial year 2022, and obviously government is seeking actually to spend 137.5 billion Ghana cedis. That's the target of government through the budget statement that we've seen from the finance minister. But the challenge now is about making up for this total expenditure. This is what government is seeking to spend, but in terms of the expected revenue, we're projecting over 100 billion Ghana cedis. That's what government is seeking to use. And obviously, if you take the 100 billion out of the expenditure that we're going to be doing for this 2022 fiscal year, that will mean that there'll be a shortfall of some 37.5 billion Ghana cedis, which you have down there. Obviously, that should be of concern to us as a state. That's the amount of money government is seeking to raise. And obviously, it will need to do that from an external source. But the challenge here is that even this 100 billion cedis that we're targeting has a little bit of a problem. And the controversy here is about the electronic transaction levy. And we know what's happening in Parliament. There's a deadlock about the amount itself. So here's the implication for us. If the e-levy does not go through, the gap would then increase, because that would be about 7% of this total amount coming out from the 100.5 billion that government is seeking to raise. And in fact, a larger chunk of this amount that we're looking at is heavily reliant on taxation. We'll prove that to you shortly. But if the e-levy fails to go through, which is about 7% out of this amount, that would then pile up onto the deficit which we're having, which is the imminent challenge which will be facing the Ghanaian economy. That would mean that would then require some over 40 billion Ghana cedis to make up for the expenditure that we have here, which obviously government is unable to raise now. Even meeting the 100 billion target is a challenge as we speak. But we need to paint that picture for you so you can see clearly where the problem is coming from. So this is our tax revenue and grants for the 2022 fiscal year. The challenge here is about 80% of that revenue that we are targeting, 80% of it is reliant on taxation, which tells you that government is heavily relying on taxation as a way of funding its activities. But then if the e-levy doesn't go through, which is about 7% of this, that would then mean that this will be affected, this will obviously be affected, and then that will take us back to where we started from, which is this 37 billion rising all the way over 40 billion. So there's a challenge here which government needs to address. And obviously that's why you've heard from the IMF and Fitch also asking that if you want to go onto the international market for some credit facility, you definitely need to be validated by the likes of the International Monetary Fund. Will government opt for that? Government says it's looking to generate funds internally. We've heard the president speak about that. The finance minister has made his point clear. So we are asking that big question here on the Pulse. Should Ghana head to the IMF once more, just when we exited the program in 2017? Fortunately, I've been joined by two individuals who understand all of this and what's happening. Professor John Gov't is the Dean of the Business School at the University of Cape Coast, and Lord Mensah, Dr. Lord Mensah as well, is an economist. We're grateful that you're joining us at this point. So, Dr. Mensah, first of all, what's your take on this? Where do we head to? The IMF, or are you looking, Professor Mensah, I'm sorry, are we looking at going for the internal mechanisms which will address our challenges? What do you think about this?
Well, if you look at the numbers you've projected on your screens, I mean, clearly it tells you that government is now in need of funds. And obviously, every situation of that form, every government must find a means of raising money. But then the proposal of going to IMF or not comes in two ways. I mean, you go to IMF for money and some, policy credibility. If you look at the history we've had with IMF, obviously it tells you that they don't come in with much money, but they come in with financial discipline. And I believe that if the World Bank, couple is telling us that we should go to IMF, then, it's telling us that we should go and ask for financial discipline from IMF. We go to IMF purposely because we've mismanaged our economy. And mismanagement tells you that go to IMF for IMF to come and instill some discipline, some structures, some austere measures to ensure that you follow through for a peanut, and then the investor will have assurance in your system or in your economy to lend to you. Otherwise, the market will not be open for the Ghanaian government to access funds. And even if the market is open for us, with the kind of ratings we have, we're going to only attract funds at a very high cost. And so effectively, it gives the signal that, yes, indeed, we should, go to IMF. But, you were presenting the numbers indicating that if the E-levy does not go through, there's going to be a huge gap in addition of the 37.5, which is the deficit that you indicated. Why do we have to look at that direction alone? But then also find a means of ensuring that we lower expenditure, which the government has given the signal. Anyway.
But Prof, the point is, the reason why we're, of course, focused very much on the E-levy is about the argument we've heard from government all of this while. The government appears to be very much reliant on that source of funding, and they've done all sorts of justifications as to why government needs that fund urgently.
That is the justification from the government. But then the government can also look at the expenditure side. You're looking at expenditure of about 137.5 billion. Now, if you look at the structures of our expenditure, you could see that some of them, government has control over them. And for those ones, I believe if government, becomes moderate, we should be able to manage those aspects. Let's take, for instance, if you take, what we call it, the grants to state-owned institutions. Last year, we were doing around 15 billion. This year alone, we projected around 26 billion for that, those grants to SOEs. Now, you ask yourself, within a year, what has happened to call for this jump of about 11 billion, difference in grant to SOEs? What is so special that this, state government agencies are coming to do within the year that has changed that much to attract that 11 billion? Even over there, if you decide to cut that one to, let's say, 20 billion, you have saved about 5 billion. In effect, if you look at the other, indicators, which we have control over, I don't want to even mention capital expenditure, because over there, a typical Ghanaian will need his roads, typical Ghanaian will need a hospital that is supposed to be provided, a typical Ghanaian will need, the market that is supposed to be provided. So I don't want to look at that direction. But then these two items, which is non-earmark, expenditure, if government should look at that, obviously, we should be able to save some money from there to offset the E-levy that we are drafting up. Let me not go there. If you look at what is happening on the ground, it tells you that, hey, look, for you to access the international market, you will need policy credibility from the IMF, which is very true. Because historically, without the IMF, it looks like our financing or maybe financial management is a problem. Now, let me give you a typical example. When we were with IMF, we were trying possible to converge to the 5% to GDP deficit that IMF gave us, which presumably is the ideal, deficit that a country must run. Immediately after the IMF, we were praying that we get off IMF so that government will have that kind of, liberation to spend, to suit what the economy is required. Immediately after the IMF, we jumped our budget deficit to 11%, of our GDP, which tells you that, it will be difficult. And even the evidence is also clear. I think somewhere within the COVID, I remember the finance minister giving somewhere 2020, yes, around 2020 thereabout. The finance minister in his budget statement gave the indication that he has to go back to Parliament for the Fiscal Responsibility Act to be revoked, right, so that he can spend his way. So that he can exceed that 5% that IMF gave to us. Then I asked myself, we had Fiscal Responsibility Committee, after the 2020, how many times have they met to keep the government, in line to ensure that we converge that 5% of, GDP that
Right.
IMF
Which
gave
is
us? I'm
the
yet to get the answer to that question.
right, which is a very critical question you're asking this afternoon. In fact, we'll explore that angle shortly, but that even flies in the face of President Akufo-Addo's Ghana Beyond Aid agenda, and I guess that's why there's a lot of hesitation on the part of the Finance Ministry to begin to engage the IMF on this. Professor John Gov't is also with us. Prof, what's your take on all of this? And Professor Mensah, you could also have your take on that, just as we deal with the issues as well. The whole idea of Ghana Beyond Aid and where government finds itself now. Do we need to abandon that policy and just go to the IMF anyway? Yes, Professor Mensah.
Yeah, I mean, Ghana Beyond Aid, I'll be saying that it's a project. We don't have to look at it within a particular regime. Ghana as a country must, look at this as a project for which maybe in the next 20 years we can work towards it. But looking at where we find ourselves now, I don't think, Ghana Beyond Aid is possible, because as we speak now, any free money that will drop in the way of Ghana, we will take it. So I would say that, yes, it's not possible within this particular time or this regime, but then we should take it as a project.
So how soon do we initiate the process of engaging the IMF?
Well, looking at it now, I mean, this could be part of the process. It could be the part of the process in a sense that I will call it economic learning process. Economic learning process because, the economy has dived, its nose down, and clearly all the indicators on the ground, shows. And any economy that is suffering, you cannot say that you will not require an aid. I mean, which is more or less, almost free money that is coming your way. But then in the end, if we should take it just as a project and then we look at it as a learning process, if we come out, how to sustain the economy, we should be able to come out with policies to come out with this, quagmire, and then possibly look at how we can, look into the future, come out with this aid that we're talking about. But let me also chip in this. You see, if you go back to, the various manifestos that are read by political parties, if clearly we should benchmark the economic performance with, these manifestos, and then ensure that we go heads on with the manifestos, it could be that at this time would have, devoid of COVID, would have been getting closer to, the process of coming off, aid. But that is not the case. As we speak now, if you benchmark most of the things happening on the ground to what was read in the manifesto, it will give you the signal that yes, indeed, government is not performing to the direction of coming off aid.
Okay, let's try and widen the conversation. This is not just about this particular administration. Obviously, what comes into mind is about our trajectory as a nation and how many times we've been to the IMF, for instance. We exited our last program in 2017. Professor Gov't is with us as well. The question we're asking, Prof, is about the IMF. Looking at the fact that we exited in 2017, is it good for us as a nation to head back to that same institution we went to for some credibility support?
Yeah, well, you have no choice. When the situation falls through. IMF is a fund, and I will tell you that as a country, we contribute to that fund. And so if we find ourselves in a situation where we will need some money as an injection, and then at the same time, the funds that we will need will come and instill some discipline of, let me put it, financial discipline, then I think we have no choice. And it tells everybody that we are going back to IMF as a result of financial mismanagement.
Right, but Professor Mensah, I was trying to find out from Professor Gov't as well. Professor John Gov't, what do you also think about this? The question as to the fact that we exited the IMF in 2017. Professor Gov't, what's your take really on this?
Well, I'm not sure we exited the IMF in 2017. We rather extended the original exiting period of 2017 to 2018, 2019, thereabouts.
Right.
So I think that should be put in the perspective that
Right.
we have. But the point is that you go to IMF basically because you have done all that you could to restore your economy to normal, but you are not able. What that means is that your policies are not receiving the confidence that the international environment want to put on your policies. Domestic institutions do not believe that your policies are working. Citizens gradually are not having confidence in the way things are being managed. So these two things will prompt you either to go to the IMF or not. And I believe we have done all that we could. We have touted so many things, but things are not working. So if the government, given the comment made by the credit rating agencies, and given the comment Ghanaians are making, it is very clear that the policy direction of the government lacks the confidence, lacks the credibility. And it is then that the IMF comes in to restore some kind of discipline and confidence into your programs and your policies so that you can quickly turn around. I believe that is what the government is running away from, because the moment you go to IMF, it is an acceptance that your policies lack all the economy. It's a valuation that the country.
Yes, and is it the case that we are in a crisis? As for instance, we've heard the country director of the World Bank say that where we're heading to is a bit dangerous for us.
We are in a deeper crisis from all perspectives. If you come to the fiscal aspect, we are in deeper crisis, and the nature of the crisis is such that the fiscal crisis is actually eating into the efficacy of monetary policy performance. And so it is eating into the key areas that we want to see about our economy. So we are in a crisis. These have been accepted by the finance minister. The government officials these days are now speaking to the fact that the country is broke. It's broke because the fiscal is weak. It's broke because monetary policy is not able to perform according to the mandate because of the fiscal dominance that has taken place. So yes, the economy is in deeper crisis. That needs some resolution quickly. As to whether we want to go to IMF, that should be an evaluation that should be made. And one pointer to the evaluation is whether or not our policies resonate with the people, whether or not our policies have the credibility and the confidence. And I can say that we lack the confidence, we lack the credibility.
The question is, what difference really will it make? Here we are, we've worked with the IMF for not just once, we've done that over a couple of years, dating way back to the 80s. Why are these strategies not working? And why should we be going back to the Bretton Woods anyway?
Well, I'm not sure the strategies have not worked, but the discipline that made the strategy work when the IMF is with us, we do not keep to that discipline when the IMF is out. That is our basic problem. In 2006, when we exited the IMF program, just after that, we took the largest Euro bond in Sub-Saharan Africa of $750 million, which we amortized in 2017. If you look at the recent IMF program, even though I was not so happy about the just ended IMF program, because some of the discipline that we see to be on the board were not available as though we are not under IMF program. But the issue is, if we could keep to the discipline, policy credibility that we put in place under IMF program, even when they are not here, we wouldn't go back to IMF. So it is the question of whether we as people, our management style is such that we are able to keep discipline, sustain discipline, and do things that are supposed to be done within the framework of proper fiscal management, proper economic management. That is what we are lacking. And I do not think that the blame should go squarely to the IMF.
Can Ghana really move beyond aid? That's been the agenda of the president. We've heard from his appointees expressing full resolve to push through that agenda. Why is it taking too long to materialize?
Well, it is something that we can do, but I can tell you that there is nothing like Ghana Beyond Aid as a framework that we are following in Ghana. It is actually a slogan that has been translated to about 30-page document without any plan of execution. So I'm not sure that we are implementing Ghana Beyond Aid. If you go to Parliament, there is an agreed medium-term framework that have been approved for government as a policy framework to implement. There is nothing like Ghana Beyond Aid. There is no pillars of Ghana Beyond Aid within all the sectors of the economy. There is no Ghana Beyond Aid into the psychic of educational curriculum and implementation. There is nothing like that in agriculture. So I do not think that we are implementing Ghana Beyond Aid, and we need to tell ourselves the bitter truth.
Right, and we need to be wrapping up with this conversation. I'll give minutes each to Professor Mensah and then you, Professor Gachi. Let me start off with you, Professor Lord Mensah. Your final takes on this. Where do we go from here, IMF or no IMF?
Well, I think we better go to IMF because history has never been on our side when it comes to self-discipline in our financial management space. And so effectively, we'll go to IMF, and IMF, the period that IMF will be with us, if it's 3 years, 4 years, and in the end, we will turn up with discipline when it comes to our finances. I will propose that we go to IMF. But then also, alternatively, if we can be disciplined when it comes to, but I don't think history has been supporting that when it comes to, self-discipline in our financial management space. So the best would be for us to go to IMF, so that we can get some policy credibility.
And for you, Professor John Gachi, what will be your final take on this?
Well, I think we have not demonstrated that we have the discipline and capacity to stay on course. We do not have the discipline to manage the affairs the way it ought to be managed. We need a greater force to do so. It is now the duty of the government to weigh the option. I would not recommend go to IMF. They should weigh their management style and their capacity. If they come to that realization that indeed they are not capable of ensuring the kind of discipline that is needed, then the IMF will be the option. But that decision, I want the government to take that decision.
Right then. And I'm sure that definitely we'll be keeping our eyes on all of this. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. Professor Lord Mensah and Professor John Gachi, all giving us their thoughts on what's happening as far as the economy is concerned. We will be bringing you some more updates as and when we have that. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us.